When I met the lucid depths of a grey whale's gaze, when I saw the aliveness in the eyes of a wolf and stood on foot before the towering family of wild African elephants who had come deliberately to meet us, I realized I was in the presence of beings whose depth of awareness was far beyond anything I had learned about them before. In the language that comes before words, which we as a group have been calling the common wild tongue recently, in the language that comes before words, the animal companions have shown me that their consciousness is interconnected with my own. So that's something we're very, very fascinated in, and your experience of that. So I wonder if you could tell us about that, about how you've come to that and how your work with animals has brought you to that understanding and what it means for you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. It's about what it means to be truly human. It's our human nature, our deep human nature, that gets called out again, gets woken again, resonates again in the companionship of the other. And I speak specifically about the other animals because that's been my closest connection. However much I love the plants and the trees, and believe me, I do, it's as though the animals have specifically called me awake. And this is something I had as a child, and I'm sure all of you here as children had that unthinking enchantment in the presence of another animal, and that innocent, instinctive knowing that you're bonded together in a flow of feeling, a flow of intuitive knowing. And I grew up on a farm in the west of Ireland. My family were farmers going back many generations. And so being with animals was completely normal. We had ducks, goats, pigs, and horses. And so one of my earliest memories, actually, I was probably about 5 years old, is getting my brother to put me up bareback on one of the farm horses, who was about probably 15 or 16 hands. And I just slid around on her back until she started to trot. And so very soon fell to the ground. But that never stopped me getting again and coming back to that immediacy of relationship. And I think what happens as an adult, it's certainly what happened to me, and it happens to all of us as adults, is that we come into a collective which is really about the separation and control. And that control is what cuts the enchanted cord that unites us with the other animals. And so we become afraid, really, of losing that control, of entering into this relationship, a relationship which, like it is with any other human being, we don't have control over it. We can only enter into the dance and respond to the invitations. And so I would say that immediacy and love that I felt in the presence of, the animals that surrounded me as a child, I didn't find again until I was an adult in my 30s. And I was sent on a journey to a remote part of northeastern Siberia, which is actually on the Bering Strait. It's where America and the Far East of Russia almost touch. And it's the country of the Indigenous Yupik Eskimo people and the Chukchi people. And it's the feeding grounds, the northern feeding grounds of the grey whale. And the grey whale is that particular species that makes this enormous journey between its birthing grounds and its feeding grounds. It's a 10,000-mile round trip along the entire coast of North America. And up in that part of the Bering Strait, the grey whales are feeding. They're feeding on the bottom layers of the seabed, on shellfish. And I was in a little skin boat, and one of the grey whales who had been feeding underneath us just surfaced right alongside us. And I heard this great whoosh of the breath, this enormous explosion of air that was like the very sea opening up and breathing and surrounding me. And that breath was more than physical. It opened something inside my heart. And the opening was to the awareness of this vast consciousness, this presence within the ocean, this breathing life of the ocean. And the whale had come to me and shook me awake back into that awareness, something I'd really lost inside a mechanized world and trying to conform to a mechanized world, which is deeply painful for all of us. And in that moment, something awoke that I never lost it again. And I've had meetings since, very profound and I would say intimate meetings at the request of the animals, because I never approach a wild animal, I never would. But at their request, they've come and made these approaches. Because what I feel and deeply understand is that they're calling us to rejoin them in this communion now, at this particularly critical time for humanity.
Do you have a sense, Eleanor, of what that kind of invitation is and how we meet that? So many of us that, well, in the wider world, don't have kind of any awareness that a more intimate relationship is possible. What do you think the animals are inviting us to do, and how do we go about that?
It's quite a question. The first thing I'd say is that I don't. I mean, we speak about animals, but of course, like humans, they're different. They have different modes of being. They have different modes of perception. They have their particular awareness of the non-physical dimension, the formless source. They have their awareness of the formless source within themselves. But what that is in the elephant is not the same as it is in the termite, for example. Although elephant and termite are bonded together through this network of relationship in which they live embedded. And that awareness is the living intelligence within them. But when I am in the presence of an elephant, then that is closer to me as a human than when I've stood on a termite mound and been awed by the intelligence of this collective being. So I think for all of us, it is a personal bond. So some of you will perhaps have had a very strong personal bond with your dog, with your cat, with the bird that comes into the garden. It is very much about each individual person. And so the animals that have come to me it has felt like a personal invitation to me. And so to give you one example, when I was in the Bering Strait, I saw whales die. I was out with hunters and I spent hours watching while I was at sea, watching what it takes for a whale to die. And it was like a wound in my heart. But it wasn't like it was a wound in my heart that I carried. And I carried it along with the sense of guilt for all that we humans have inflicted on our fellow beings. And several years later, when I was actually in the birthing lagoons of the grey whales, the same species that I saw die, and in their birthing lagoons, when a mother brought me her baby, I was in a small boat, and the mother brought me her baby. She came alongside. She went down beneath her baby. She lifted it up, little 3-week-old whale baby, so that I could touch her baby. And she gave me that trust, the most profound trust that any creature can bring you, that any mother will bring you, is to say, here, touch my newborn. And it was a sense of coming to bring me healing for that wound of sadness and grief that I had in my heart.
Wow.
So we're in a world that is more deeply awake, aware, alive, conscious than we allow ourselves to realize.
Do you have a sense then that this is something we as humans have forgotten? So when we have talked in this forum about, it might just be me actually, talking about the common wild tongue, it's a concept I have borrowed from the Romany Gypsy tradition, actually, this understanding that the natural world has a wild tongue that everything understands, and it's humans that have forgotten. Do you think that is that your experience? Does that ring true?
The universal tongue is, we find it again when we I think of it as dropping below the surface of my mind. So the surface of my mind is it's like all of us. It's busy with many disjointed and jumbled thoughts, frequently not my own, because they've come in through our collective that works through the media. And they're not in relationship with each other sometimes. They're just distractions. And that's part of what it is to be human right now, is to, have this busy mind. And so but beneath this very superficial, aspect of my mind, there is this deeper level. And it's a dropping into a quietness, a spaciousness, a deep calm, where you're listening not only with your ears, but with your whole being. You're listening for what is being conveyed to you along that universal tongue, the universal language of life. And that's our deep nature. And that's when you feel a sense of homecoming to yourself, in which you're in communion with the rest of life, the wild community particularly, which is what we're speaking of here. And equally with the stones, with the elements of the water, with the wind, they all begin to resonate inside at a level that is, I would say, more expansive than our human language.
And do you remember the moment when this occurred to you, when you found this? Was this, so you were talking about the whale breathing as the ocean, was that a moment where that kind of opened this up and you remembered, or you just felt that it was possible?
Yeah, I knew in that moment that something had profoundly changed inside me, and that was the awareness that life is not the surface. It's not a surface, because through our everyday perceptions, we're only aware of the surface of things, and the depth dimension remains concealed, because this is how our minds work. But when the heart opens, and then there's a sense of meeting the heart. And let's speak again about the whales, that the heart is meeting the heart and coming into a higher degree of resonance. Then there is a flow of creative energy, because a true meeting allows newness to come in. And that's the flow of creative energy that results from the authentic meeting in the one heart, the unity of life, but heart meets heart within the unity of life. And I took what is, sorry.
No, you please carry on. Yeah.
So the need, I would say, what's crying out in us even beyond words now, is for that the truly creative. Because if we stay trapped in our patterns of, fear, guilt, judgment, frustration, helplessness, all these things, as we face this crisis, so there's this deep heart call for the truly creative. And for me, the natural world responds. I can say that from everything I have experienced in my life, there is a deep response that comes to us from the natural world, the beings of nature, the elements.
And do you think it takes that kind of big experience with something so other, like the whale? Or is that something that we can all go out and work on? I mean, for example, as a group here, we have a practice of being with a place and revisiting and doing various things there to try and make our own kind of membranes more porous to the other. What's your thinking about that? I mean, you had that big one. Do you think it's possible to reach this by practicing? And I guess there's all kinds of ways up the mountain, isn't there?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for asking that, Rachel, because I'm aware when I'm speaking that you know, I can't help it because this is like what happened. But I'm really aware that it you know, or as some people say, size doesn't matter. It's you know, it's really not it's really not these you know, I suppose peak experiences we could call them, but there isn't any hierarchy here. And you know, I have a sit spot, which is what we're I think referring to, and when it, which I learned from John Young, and I'm sure you're familiar with John Young and Nate Summers, and the suggestion was to let the sit spot call you, you know. So I went. I live near a beautiful river gorge, and I went out walking, and I thought, maybe my sit spot will call me, you know. And I was walking along by the riverbank, and you know, listening to the water. And then I just immediately, I could feel it, right? There was a tree with a, you know, quite mossy underneath. And then a bed of stones that made a lovely musical running water sound. And this sit spot, I could said, welcome. And that's a very everyday experience. You know, it's a simple, ordinary place in one way. There are lots of places along the river I could have sat, but that particular one let me settle in. And I can go, and it feels like a friendship. So it's developing this friendship. You know, you meet up and have a chat.
And does that give you kind of the porosity, if we could use that word, to kind of communicate, to come into communion with the kind of bigger animals that you kind of have written about? And do you think that's really important to keep your relationship going?
Yeah, it is. It's really important. And when you feel a little battered by life, you know, I lived in London for ages, and there was a group of hawthorn trees, you know, it was up near Hampstead Heath. And when I was feeling a little battered by life, you know, I'd go and see the trees, and the trees would quietly, you know, accept whatever. I mean, it's different for them, obviously, but there was a lovely sense of friendship, of companionship with human beings, because of course they're sitting there, or they're growing there in the middle of us, and they're tuned into how we are a lot of the time. And so I would say that this you know, this aspect of friendship has been really important to me. Things that I haven't been able to speak to other people about, I would go and talk, you know, I would tell the trees. And yeah.
Wonderful, great. So there's hope for us all yet. My last question to you, really, before we kind of, well, I'll speak to Justine and then we'll open it up. But I'm really interested, and I wonder if something that stops us being able to have these deep, intimate relationships with other beings is the kind of realization that we have to completely change how we live our lives, you know, as individuals and culturally, and the kind of just the guilt, the shame, the difficulty that comes with that. And I'm just really interested for you, how has this realization changed your life? You know, what has it called you to do in response?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very potent question. I've ridden horses all my life, right? This is just to give you an example, because I grew up with horses. And then I had a horse as an adult as well. And I look back on things I accepted from the conventional world of, riding, horse care. And I feel I feel shame, right? And that's from somebody who loved my horse, right? Very deeply. But I didn't see him as an equal. And that's the difference. I didn't. And over time, I did. It was a bit like being in a marriage where, you start off not perhaps understanding each other, let's say perfectly, and then you work through it. And so it's a working through of that relationship. And he was, he's gone now, but he was a very strong-minded individual. And I say individual. And so in order to have this joy and this freedom that, I would feel, I had to really change. I had to let go of fundamentally wanting to be the one who made the decisions and was in control, separate from him. And so the education that he gave me was to relate to him in that sense of a fellow being in companionship, and then we would do things together. That feels really different. I don't know if any of you here are riders, but that sense of, yeah, we're doing things together. And then I would get this joyful response, right, which would just come straight through your body because you're feeling everything. And this joyful response is, yeah, she got it, right? We're doing this together. And I suppose we could look at that in a more collective way and say, well, we're here as humans, and we're not here to dominate life on Earth. We're here to actually really enjoy being with life on Earth and work together, which is what all the other beings are doing. They're all in this magical web of participation with each other to create and sustain the conditions that are most conducive for life.
I love that idea of that sense of flow and joy that comes when you're in it together.
Exactly.
That is just beautiful. And I kind of wonder whether that could be just a more common thing for us all to experience as a species. Yeah, I wonder even how we get individuals to experience that and then to spread it out. It's just kind of, that feels like the goal.
Yeah, there's the beauty and the joy of actually flowing together with another creature and we have it with, I mean, I'm sure, many of you have dogs and you see how much fun they take in, being with you, or running, walking with you, just then coming back to you and say, oh, look what I saw, and this sense of spontaneous joy. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Eleanor.